Alrighty, so this hopefully looks appealing to everybody. You're going to learn how to get rid of all of your technical debt after this 20-minute talk. This is, I'll forewarn you all too. I have, I did a lot of public speaking before, and it's been a couple of years of sitting in front of my home office and in front of a Zoom screen. So I'm actually really excited to be in front of people in person speaking again. So this should be really fun. Actually, this content itself will be interesting. I'm going to have a lot of fun speaking to folks. So as John mentioned, my name is Boo Lam, and let's see. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I flew all the way here just to do the meetup today. I'm just kidding. Anyway, I'm what's called a community evangelist with our DevCentral team. And so F5 actually has a couple of communities. And DevCentral is the one that's been around for a long time at this point. It was formed about 18 years ago, and I'll give a plug for DevCentral as well in that Nginx has the super user program that you just saw there, but DevCentral also has an MVP program, and so we recognize our top users of our community on the DevCentral side of things, and they get lots of lavish gifts, and they get to go to specific events and stuff like that. So they get internal knowledge with F5, like they sign an NDA, and you're actually part of feedback at that point. And meet with folks like Joel actually, and Joel was an MVP back in the day, and he's kind of risen up to be one of our CTOs at F5, and so we can thank DevCentral for that. A couple other things, I guess. I was so before becoming a community evangelist, I've been doing that for about a year at this point, and previous to that, I was a solutions engineer with F5, and I did that for about 10 years. Before that, I was in consulting, and before that, I was a network engineer for a gold mining company. And how I would describe what I do today is just talking to as many people as possible. So I would love to connect with folks on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and it's hard to summarize what my actual job is sometimes at F5. Like people will ask me what I do, and it's hard to explain. But I could summarize it by just saying I speak to a lot of people, and I could be speaking to people to show them things that F5 does, and I could be speaking to people to hear from the community things that you'd like to see F5 do, or things that you're having issues with your product, and you could see something done in a better way and improve the product. That's primarily what I do is talk to a lot of people. So you might find me on our YouTube channel. We live stream every week, and we also go to events. So I'm actually here for GovWare as well. And we go to events and we talk to people on the show floor at those events as well. Okay, so enough about that. Let's talk about technical debt. So this slide here, we're trying to describe what happens where you might be in a situation where you've inherited a whole lot of issues inside of an environment. If I were to ask people, are you working in an environment today where you started totally greenfield in the last 2 years and you have no issues, you've built up everything perfectly the way that you want it? No hands raised. Okay. This happens over time, right? And I'd say this happened, I worked in an environment like this too. Like this happens because at a point in time, you had to make a decision that was like, okay, this is going to be good for the short term and it gets us by. Maybe we didn't have enough budget to put together the solution that we wanted, and so we're making compromises here. Well, those compromises add up over time. And it turns into kind of a bit of a mess like this. And that poses its challenges. And then in the last couple of years, we have this. So who recognizes this eye chart? A couple folks. So this is the CNCF landscape. And it's pretty crazy, hey? There's a couple F5 logos here on certain pieces, but when you look at this, and we go back to this, and we're like, okay, we're starting over here, and we're going to make decisions looking at the CNCF landscape for modern applications, what we're going to implement. Well, you can see how you can end up with this if you're looking at this and you're kind of doing your best to evaluate and make decisions. And there's compromises along the way. So a couple of things to do with that. This increases security risk. I would say that when we look at the amount of security issues that are created just from misconfiguration, that in itself is a security risk, or not being able to handle upgrades in a timely manner. That's a security risk because of all of the components and the technical debt that you've inherited. Operational complexity. So this kind of hit home because when I would speak to customers as a solution engineer, I would take time to figure out, hey, what does your business do, and how can F5 help that? Because ultimately, everything has to go back to revenue. Whether you're a public company and your CEO is making promises on revenue, or you're a private company, you're trying to grow, all that revenue is important. Now, all that operational complexity, as that increases, that's going to chip away at your revenue that's coming in. So there's like a delta between the amount of operational cost to your environment and then the amount of actual business value that's delivered after that. At some point, you might actually have more operational complexity than the actual business value that's delivered, and then the company is starting to lose money potentially because of technical solutions. It also makes knowledge management exponentially more complicated. So, one thing I think about is I used to work in this company where there was a guy who was maybe 70 years old, and he wrote a program when he was at that company in his 40s, I believe, and he was the only person that knew how to maintain that application. And whenever, once in a while, there would be a support ticket that would come in and be like, oh, it's got to go to John to resolve that support ticket, because he was the only guy that, literally the only guy that knew how to operate that application. And so there was no way to do any sort of knowledge transfer with him. Like he barely showed up to work because he knew that he had to handle like one ticket a month for that application, but we couldn't fire him because that application depended on his operational knowledge, or his knowledge. And so, I left the company before they had to deal with that. But there's issues when it comes to knowledge management there. So at F5, if you've spoken to F5 before in the last few years, we have something that we call adaptive applications. And this is an architectural framework. When we try to rationalize all the products that we have at F5, we have a lot of pieces that deliver an application. And it was hard to explain to customers, take a little bit of this and take a little bit of that, and all of a sudden F5 has painted your world with sunshines and rainbows and everything is all great and whatnot. What we did was we rationalized it with something called adaptive applications, so we could say, okay, regardless of the F5 products, you need these solutions to deliver an application. And so we built out this architectural framework into a pattern so that people could maintain that, so they could figure out, okay, for delivering this application, I just need these components, whether it's F5 or not. We'll just take the lead as far as that architecture goes, so that folks can benefit from that. And if some of that happens to be F5 products, that's great. So the things that we're trying to address here, the things that I just talked about, security threats, performance and resilience, speed of deployments for new applications, unifying policy across environments as well. I think that's something that's becoming really important when we look at a multi-cloud world. I could say 5 years ago, I would have conversations with customers where they'd say, hey, we're moving to cloud. And then I would say, which one, or all of them? And they would say, well, I'm just moving to AWS, and I'm fine there. I'm not going to take on any of the clouds. And then you go visit them a year later, and they're like, well, we got this little bit of Azure over here. Oh, we got a little bit of Ali over here because we have our Chinese parts of the company. And so all of a sudden, they become this multi-cloud company when they never actually set out to do that in the first place. And then you have the it's complicated to be able to manage a singular policy that applies to different types of clouds that have all their different ways of deploying. So we do this in two ways. Sorry, this architecture is broken up in two ways. So we have these service tiers. So what we're trying to illustrate here is that we have a services tier for global shared services, and we want to be able to say, okay, there's certain parts of your application delivery that are going to sit in this global services tier. Great. It could be, so you could think about it physically, or you could think about it logically, because some of these global services could just exist as a SaaS service, and you don't necessarily touch it, even touch it in the form of a cloud infrastructure. A site shared services tier. So we have these little tabs here that go through, different cloud providers, your own data center. And then there's specific services that are shared by the site, so that could be firewalls or networking. And then we have the app services tier, so specific components that are required for those applications. We break that up as well. And then we have this management and operational services tier. And so what we're saying there is we've drawn it off to the side. It could very well live inside of this cloud provider, but what we're saying here is that we need to move it off of the data plane at least, and have that control plane a little bit separately. We see this all the time with, especially with F5, and there'll be like some sort of issue with security or whatnot. And we find all these people who have put their management IP address out on the internet. Sometimes there's reasons to do that, but if you can kind of get away from that and move management over to a separate control plane, a separate area, then that's what we're after. Okay, so from there, we've got our services tiers sorted out. And again, we're still not talking about any specific products here. Then we're actually looking at what kind of value we're going to be able to deliver and how we organize that and match that up with the services tiers. So unified security and connectivity, the idea here is that we can get to the point where we're ideally trying to design unified policy, definition, and enforcement. So we want to be able to say, okay, for AWS and Azure, we're going to have this security policy, network security policy, and regardless of how it's deployed within there, we're going to have that singular policy, and then the individual APIs will take care of that at that point. There's going to be a point where it joins together. System telemetry and advanced insight. This is one where, yeah, we need that over in the management and operational services tier, and from that, we should be able to gather enough information to start making smart decisions about how to handle things that are going on in the environment as far as like reacting to services going down or being able to scale. So that would fit into there. Common tooling and automation. So at this point, automation is a pretty standard thing inside of most environments. And we want to be able to have a tier, or we want to be able to group those tools in such a way that they work together, but in such a way that they can also be removed and plugged back in. They're all modular. And then scalable real-time application delivery. So here we want to have our services organized in such a way that they're going to kind of cohesively work together, whether it's from the global shared services tier or the site shared services tier. So let's say we have global load balancing up at the top there. I think that's my next slide. We want to be able to scale from a global perspective or from a site perspective, maybe even within an application. And so this slide here, we also have something that we were calling secure cloud architecture. And this was us organizing products into a zone, into a secure zone. And so this is an example of this where we have, now we're actually listing products on here, but we have something, well, Bolt Mesh, but this is actually our distributed cloud deployment of F5. And so we have this at the site services tier, and then we have VPCs that potentially have individual applications and Nginx, Kubernetes inside of there. And then you can kind of see how we've started to map out global shared services on here and the management and operational tier. Okay, so what kind of things can we do for application scalability? Again, no specific products here, but looking at the global scale services, things like global server load balancing, DNS, doing API gateway from that perspective, adaptive scaling, being able to scale out components that are closer to the application, and then all of this with self-healing delivery. So it's important to be able to have, I think in another slide here, all that telemetry and data being fed back into the system so that we can do this self-healing if we know about what's happening in the environment. And then from here, on the management and operational tier, the goal here, this is the goal, being able to have global IT actually be able to define policies, whether network policies, security policies, connectivity policies, And then when the application developer actually wants to push down an application, it just inherits all of that. That's the goal. I'm not saying that there's necessarily an F5 product that's going to specifically do that for you, but that would be an ideal scenario. This is the data insights tier, so having visibility into the environments here. We do call out open telemetry on that. I think that's the project that's probably going to win as far as this type of data. And then this slide here, we do have a lot of stuff on here. We do have products on here, but they're not even F5 products on here. But this is as far as how these policies are going to get pushed down. We have a tier where we're calling out all the different sources of truth. So hopefully people are building towards that model where you have a source of truth, but that source of truth doesn't have to be one source of truth. The source of truth more kind of maps to the function that it is. So there might be sources of truth that are lend themselves more to security operations, and certain source of truth lend themselves more to the application code base, potentially. From there, we kind of list off some tools that you can use for testing integration and pipeline. And then we have the API tier itself, and then the APIs that will actually dictate what the automation tasks are going to be that get pushed down. So that's actually my last slide. Yep, you had a question? No? Okay. So that's the last slide there. So, what that is called, and, as you work with F5 folks over the next little while here, we're going to be talking a lot more about adaptive applications. We want to be able to set a design pattern that allows people to do things in a repeatable way, have consistent security, have the ability to scale their applications. And it doesn't necessarily have to be F5 stuff. But the benefit to F5 is that we can then have conversations with customers that go beyond the architecture and get to the product conversations, because the architecture is now sorted out, if you will. So that all said, that's what I got for you all today.